When you think about the towering figures of the 20th century, few lives embodied the fight for freedom and the sheer power of moral courage quite like Nelson Mandela. Today, we're going to dive into the story of a true hero, a leader whose integrity and vision literally forged a new nation from the ashes of oppression. And listen to these words. These were not just words spoken in a speech. This was a solemn vow, delivered from the dock while he was facing a possible death sentence. This one statement, it just captures the absolute essence of the man, his unwavering commitment to a just future, a cause for which he was ready to sacrifice everything. People call him Madiba, the father of the nation. And think about it, in a political world so often messy with scandal, his legacy just stands apart. He is still the only leader of a democratic South Africa whose presidency was completely untouched by corruption. He wasn't just a politician, he was the country's moral compass.
But look, to really understand the president, you first have to understand the revolutionary. Mandela's journey to the presidency wasn't a campaign trail, it was a decades-long war fought in the trenches against apartheid, a battle that would forge him into a global icon of resistance.
You can really see how his strategy had to evolve. In 1944, he helped bring new energy to the movement by co-founding the ANC Youth League. By 52, he was leading this massive, nonviolent defiance campaign. But as the state became more and more brutal, the strategy had to change. So in 1961, after they had exhausted all peaceful options, he co-founded Umkhonto weSizwe, the Spear of the Nation. It was a last resort, this shift to armed struggle, and it led directly to his arrest and trial. For his fight against racial oppression, Nelson Mandela would spend 27 years as a political prisoner. Think about that, nearly 3 decades of his life, just gone. Spent in a tiny cell, completely cut off from the world and his family.
And this moment right here, it just shows you the incredible power of his principles. In 1985, the government offered him freedom, but with strings attached. He had to renounce the armed struggle. Mandela said no. He knew that a compromised freedom was no freedom at all. He chose to stay a prisoner rather than betray his cause. The irony is, the prison walls that were meant to silence him, they actually ended up amplifying his voice. His imprisonment transformed him from a leader in South Africa into the world's most famous political prisoner. Free Nelson Mandela became a rallying cry across the entire globe, a symbol for fighting injustice everywhere. So when he was finally released in 1990, the whole world was holding its breath. South Africa was a powder keg, right on the brink of a full-blown civil war. But instead of revenge, Mandela chose reconciliation. He sat down for these incredibly delicate negotiations with President F.W. de Klerk, the very man who represented his oppressors. And together, they steered the nation away from the abyss. And for this unbelievable achievement, for peacefully dismantling apartheid and transferring power, Nelson Mandela and F.W. de Klerk were jointly awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1993. It was this incredible testament to their shared, and let's be honest, improbable statesmanship. But getting out of prison wasn't the finish line. Nope, it was the start of maybe his biggest challenge yet. As president, Mandela had one term and one mission: heal a deeply fractured nation and build a new, unified South Africa from the ground up. On April 27, 1994, millions of Black South Africans voted for the very first time. The result, as you can see, was a landslide for the ANC. And on May 10th, Nelson Mandela was inaugurated as the nation's first Black president, its first democratically elected president. Just an incredible moment. So one of the first things his government did, and it was just so profound, was establish the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The idea was radical. Instead of revenge for the horrible crimes of apartheid, they chose a path of truth. Perpetrators could get amnesty if they publicly confessed, and victims finally had a platform to tell their stories. It was this massive, painful, but absolutely necessary process of national healing. And this is where you really see his genius for symbolism. In 1995, South Africa hosted the Rugby World Cup. Now, the national team, the Springboks, had always been this hated symbol of white supremacy. But what did Mandela do? He embraced them. He famously walked onto the field for the final match wearing the captain's jersey, and in that one moment, he united the entire nation, Black and white, in pure, shared joy. But it wasn't just about symbols, right? This was all backed up by real, fundamental change. In 1996, Mandela signed a new constitution into law. It was one of the most progressive in the entire world, cementing equality, human dignity, and the rule of law as the bedrock of the new South Africa.
Because he knew that political freedom doesn't mean a whole lot if you can't feed your family. So his government launched the Reconstruction and Development Program. It was this massive plan to tackle the deep, deep inequalities left by apartheid by investing in housing, healthcare, jobs, and basic services for the millions who had been left behind for so long. And maybe, just maybe, one of the most powerful things he did as president was leaving. On a continent where so many leaders cling to power for life, Mandela was clear from day one. He would only serve a single term. By stepping down in 1999, he cemented the country's new democracy and set an incredible example for the rest of the world.
But come on, you didn't think he was just going to retire and fade away, did you? Of course not. Retirement from politics didn't mean retirement from service. In his later years, Mandela took his mission to the global stage, becoming this tireless advocate for peace and human dignity everywhere. Through his foundations, he raised millions for causes like children's welfare and education. He became such a crucial voice in the global fight against HIV/AIDS, really helping to break the stigma. He even kept working as a peacemaker, mediating conflicts in places like Burundi. His work, it just never, ever stopped. He gave his country a blueprint. He gave them a vision for a just and equal society. He showed them what was possible. But after he left office, the path he had so carefully laid out, it started to go in a different direction. The heroic chapter was drawing to a close. And it is absolutely heartbreaking to compare the two eras. The unquestioned integrity of his presidency gave way to years of widespread corruption under his successors. The spirit of national reconciliation that he worked so hard for has been torn apart by rising inequality and deepening social divisions. For millions, that economic freedom he dreamed of just never arrived. The dream, it began to fade. When you listen to those words from his inauguration back in 1994, you can just feel the incredible power of the hope he inspired. It was a promise of a new dawn. And it's that promise that makes the decline that followed, the squandering of this incredible legacy, so painful. Nelson Mandela's legacy is secure. He gave his nation the greatest gift of all, freedom, and a model of selfless leadership that's still a beacon for the entire world. But the story of South Africa didn't end with him. And to truly understand where the country is today, we have to ask that painful question. What happened to the Rainbow Nation? In our next explainer, we're going to start to find the answer.